in a couple of interviews, he talked about it. He made the joke that alimony is a shortened term that they gave for the phrase "all the money." Alimony, all the money.
Life's Third Act is a podcast dedicated to helping you get the most out of your retirement. Sponsored by TuckerAllen. Here's attorney CPA Joe Cordell.
Welcome to another episode of Life's Third Act. As is our custom on this show, we like to look for learning opportunities regarding estate planning, and where better to learn than to look at the lives of celebrities. So we have been doing a series of celebrities over the past couple of years. And this week, we're going to talk about a comedian that I know you all are familiar with, and I'm willing to bet that almost every one of you is a huge fan. Marlea, why don't you introduce our subject for this week?
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about Robin Williams. I'm sure everybody knows him, from people my age all the way to everybody who watches this. He has been in all kinds of things that, we all still are very familiar with today. I don't think his name is going anywhere anytime soon, fortunately.
No, he's he was one of those comedians that was hugely versatile.
Mm-hmm.
He was funny, he could write, he could act, he could host TV shows, which he did for a period. He's just was a very versatile, very smart guy.
Yes.
So let's start with his history. Tell us about where he came from and how he got there.
So he was born in Chicago, Illinois in 1951. His mother was an ex-model, and his dad worked for Ford and was actually one of the higher-ups. So he did live a pretty privileged life. He didn't come from, a bad background or anything. His family was very healthy, very happy. They definitely supported him in everything that he did. And he credits his mother a lot for his comedic influences, because she was very funny, very outgoing. And he kind of just picked up on that as a child and thought, I want to make something out of this. I want to bring joy to people as well.
So they ended up moving to California related to the father's job, right?
Yes, that's correct. And then from there, he, went to middle school, went to high school. He did do a little bit of comedy in California, but it really wasn't until he got accepted into Juilliard that he really began in that acting and the comedic realm. And he made it in Juilliard from his freshman year to his junior year. And then his teachers basically said, you have nothing else to learn here. Like, you're too good for this school. So he went back to California, and he started out where all of the, up-and-coming comedians were starting out at. It was a local club, and bigger comedians in there remember seeing him and being like, wow, this guy has it. Like, he's going to go really big places. He did. He definitely did.
Yeah, and that whole experience at Juilliard was pretty informative.
Mm-hmm.
He had done some acting in college, a small college in California. I don't remember the name of it, but that's, I think, where he got bit by the bug, so to speak, and decided this is what he must do with his life. And so he surprisingly, I think there were 2 people admitted to Juilliard that year or that season, however that's done. There were 2 people. And the other person, interestingly enough, is Christopher Reeves. They ended up becoming very good friends for the rest of Christopher Reeves' life, who died in, I think, 2005 or so. So they were close. And Christopher Reeves' comment about the energy that we've all seen on stage, that was Robin Williams 24/7. It's hard to imagine functioning day to day with that level of energy. While he did crash every now and then, and he did have some depression, which we'll talk about, but his general condition is this very high nervous energy sort of thing. And yeah, what you said was interesting, because you would think that Juilliard would think that they would always be the right person in the right rather the right place and the right people to learn to be great in whatever field of the arts, you're focusing on there, music, whatever. And in his case, though, they focus on a classical model. So they prepare you to do things in the most traditional classical way, the most proven methods and formulas. And for him, he was breaking all the molds. And what he was doing was so radically innovative that it didn't perfectly fit with their methods. And to the credit of this lady I don't know if we even know her name, but her advice to him was, she was an official there, somebody in the administration, who told him that, he could struggle to get through there, which, he violated, we can imagine. He wasn't a rule follower.
Yeah, no.
He buckled under all of the systems and questioned everything. And interestingly enough was having friction and perhaps some question as to whether he was going to finish that program. And so this woman had the insight to see that this wasn't somebody who lacked talent or who was just rowdy and disruptive. Instead, this is somebody who's doing something very novel and very inventive, and that he probably should go down that road and not be inhibited by even adopting these very classical models when he's going to show the world a different way to do what he did. And he did. I mean, he did something that there was no precedent that I know of in comedy of what he was doing on stage. So, it was, to his credit, he escaped Juilliard without losing, his unique vision.
Everything you build for you and your family deserves protecting. All of those important assets you have worked so hard to acquire and enjoy, you want to make sure they're handled with care. At TuckerAllen, our attorneys will customize an estate plan that will work for you and your family's goals and needs. TuckerAllen, estate planning, probate, and trust administration. Visit TuckerAllen.com.
And I really like that, they didn't push him down to be that traditional, because a lot of times you kind of see actors, actresses come out of Juilliard like that, but his professors were like, you're so great, go and be yourself and do all of the things. But his big break really came when he started in the Mork and Mindy show. So actually what happened with that was an actor dropped out last minute, the actor who was supposed to play Mork, and all of the directors were just so impressed by his audition, and they were like, we have to have this guy. And Robin Williams played Mork, and he improvised a lot of his lines. He improvised a lot of his comedy, but in a very good way. So he would kind of stick to the script, obviously, but it was very much him. He very much became that character, and I mean, it definitely just took off, and it really pushed his career to the next level, because all of a sudden, he wasn't really just a comedian anymore. He started becoming an actor and a voice actor and starring in just all kinds of things.
Yeah, and over the years, Academy Award nominations.
Yes.
I know he won at least one. Best Supporting Actor in Good Will Hunting, I think.
Yes, and then 6 Golden Globes and 5 Grammys, which that's a lot.
Man, oh man.
I know.
Yeah. One comment I'll make is about the Mork and Mindy. I didn't watch that show much, but certainly I know it was big. And when was it? Was it the late 70s, early 80s?
Yes.
Anyway, so the person who was doing the auditions for that show and chose Robin Williams virtually on the spot had been sitting there, and a number of people had come through and done the audition. So maybe Robin Williams was a 15th or so person who comes in, and he said that Robin Williams was the only one who came in as an alien.
Mm-hmm.
The others, came in as actors, determined to show how an alien should act. And instead, Robin Williams came in as the alien. And I don't understand this statement, but this guy describing it said that he came in and rather than sit in the chair appropriately, he sat somehow on his head. And I don't know how you do that, but the point is he came in as an alien and just, blew away everybody in the room. So he cinched the part, but nobody listening to this who's seen much of him would be surprised to hear that.
No.
Incidentally, I thought Miss Doubtfire was one of the funniest movies I've seen.
I love Miss Doubtfire, and I love Good Will Hunting. I love the Dead Poets Society, all of them. Even Aladdin, I mean, that was a huge thing when I was a kid. And he played the genie.
Yeah. Actually, I didn't know that. You can tell that I must have seen or listened to part of Aladdin, but maybe not. Yeah, apparently that was a big role for him, his voice in that.
Yeah, it was huge. And then he was supposed to play in the second one, which is, I think it's called like The Return of Jafar, but Disney broke an agreement with him, and then they ended up having to like pay him some money to like rectify all of it. But he was definitely in the first one. I don't think, unless you know that he's actually the genie and then listen to it and you're like, oh, that is Robin Williams, I don't think you would ever really catch it.
So let's talk about his family life.
Yeah. Williams did marry 3 times. He married Valerie Velarde, and that was in 1978. He did have his first child, Zach, with her in 1989. And they were happy, but it kind of rolled into a divorce. There was a lot of speculations that he actually cheated with Zach's nanny, Marcia Garces, who is actually his second wife. But
I don't think that's much a matter of speculation.
No, yeah. So there was all kinds of things about it. It was a little bit scandalous. But he did end up divorcing Valerie, and then he married Marcia in 1986, who he went on to have 2 more children with, Zelda in 1989 and Cody in 1991. So altogether, he did have 3 children, and then he did divorce Marcia, and I think he was actually on pretty good terms with all of his exes at that point, and he went on to marry Susan Schneider, who will play a big role in his estate, and she is his widow, but they were very happy. I think he kind of just wanted the family to be whole, no matter divorces, no matter, different...
And they didn't marry, though, until 2011, correct?
Yes, yeah. They married pretty late. He divorced Marcia in, I believe it was 2008, and then he started dating Susan shortly after that. So they may have been dating in between. Nobody knows.
Yeah, by all accounts, he was a great dad.
Mm-hmm.
I think he had a great relationship with all 3 of his kids. He was very generous, very giving. He wasn't at all tight-fisted with money.
No.
He tended to be very generous and spent lavishly on those he cared about. He did feel a financial pinch of sorts due to the 2 divorces.
Mm-hmm.
In a couple of interviews, he talked about it. He made the joke that alimony is a shortened term that they gave for the phrase "all the money." Alimony, all the money. So he paid a whole lot of money in alimony in both of those 2 divorces that he had, and he was trying to sort of recover financially. So I think that was going on in the latter years of his life.
Yeah.
We should talk also about his drug, alcohol problems.
Yeah, so he did, obviously, as we see in a lot of these celebrity cases, he did have an issue with drugs and alcohol. He kind of got into it just based on the scene that he was in, which is really surprising it's surprising and not surprising for a guy that everybody spoke about so highly and so, energetic and happy all the time. But I do think that obviously we'll see he struggled a lot with depression, and I think this became a coping mechanism for it. So he did struggle with that. I do believe he went to rehab twice, I believe I read. And so he kind of got over that. And I think more than twice. Was it more than twice? Okay. I read there was 2 big times that he went for a little while. But he did come out on the other side sober to a certain extent, but Yeah, I think it's pretty common that we see this with a lot of those bigger celebrities, and I don't think it affected his life as much as it did a lot of other celebrities, to where it was, he was completely addicted. That was the only thing that he was living. Because like you said, he was a good dad. He had like a great family. He wanted to keep them all together. And so I think he really realized, like, oh, this is ruining my family. I have to find different ways of coping. And, it unfortunately probably led to his death, but that's to be discussed.
Well, yeah, he started using drugs and alcohol early in his career.
Yeah.
And in fact, originally he found alcohol as a sort of medication that allowed him to go on stage and be more effective in stand-up comedy. He, oddly enough, he was shy, which I think we all can tell that.
Yeah.
While he's this incredibly outrageous figure, I always sensed that there was a part of him that was shy.
Yeah.
And as contradictory as that seems, I wasn't surprised to read that he really had some stage fright before he would go on to do live comedy. And he found that, I guess, primarily alcohol, maybe something else in addition. But he found that, for many years, it helped him, do better on stage. So I think that was how it started. The Belushi connection, which many people, I think, watching this will recall, that when Belushi died of the drug overdose. So that evening, Robin Williams came by and visited with Belushi. Robert De Niro was also there, and I think Robert De Niro may have been with Robin Williams. So they came and partied a little bit with Belushi that night. There was apparently large amounts of cocaine, heroin, perhaps other drugs. And Robin Williams was stunned when he realized the next day, someone told him when he was on the set, I think making a movie, and somebody interrupted him and told him about this, and he was just stunned. He had no idea that when he was spending time with Belushi that night, that Belushi would be dead in 12 hours or something. So that had an impact on him. He did go into treatment shortly thereafter, but he went into treatment several times. Never completely licked those demons, so to speak. But it's not difficult to believe that somebody with a personality like that, that there would be associated problems of, whether you call it anxiety, whether it's a combination, I suspect, of anxiety and depression. But it's not surprising to hear that. When you just watch a guy like that, you think, man, oh man, for him to operate at that level, there has to be, a counterpart to that. And there was. So with his great gifts came some liabilities, and he struggled with those for the balance of his career. But as you said, Marley, of course they impacted to some extent his career, but not the way we've talked about on this show about other figures before, where alcohol and drugs just, dramatically diminished their performances or their careers. In this case, I think what perhaps exacerbated this propensity more than anything else was a diagnosis that occurred toward the end of his life. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so we kind of saw this in the Casey Kasem case as well. So if you go back and listen to that episode, you'll hear a bit about this too. But he was originally diagnosed with Parkinson's, but a lot of times what happens with Parkinson's is it can instead actually be Lewy body dementia. They have kind of the same signs, but he did get diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, and it was very early onset, but living with that is really difficult. You lose a lot of your motor functions, you lose obviously a lot of your mental state, and he just honestly really couldn't handle that. It was very hard for him and his family. I mean, it's really hard for a lot of people, and a lot of celebrities that we're familiar with, they do have it. One of them that we were talking about was Bruce Willis. He's a really obviously well-known actor and has spoken out a lot about his disease, but he did get diagnosed with that, and he did have a couple of heart issues along with that too, and that was due to the drug and alcohol use as well.
Yeah, yeah. And you're talking about Robin Williams had the heart condition.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And I think though, Marley, that I'm not sure that they actually knew for sure that it was Lewy body dementia until after his death.
Yeah.
So they knew that while it was diagnosed as Parkinson's, they knew that there were some things that didn't seem to fully fit. But as you said, he was experiencing all of these very troubling symptoms of the disease that I think doubtlessly contributed to any depression he might have otherwise been inclined toward. And there was a bit of a spiral toward the end, and a lot of questions were more fully explained, though, when I think the autopsy might have actually confirmed the diagnosis of the Lewy body dementia. But so during this period of time when it was believed that it was Parkinson's and he was having all of these very troubling symptoms, his mental condition, not surprisingly, deteriorated. And many of our viewers already know that he ultimately committed suicide. He committed suicide in 2014. Is that correct?
2014, yes.
So, but leading up to the suicide, it wasn't as if he was out of his head or it didn't fit the picture of what I originally thought before I started reading up in preparation for this show. You associate people who commit suicide as being in a condition of irrationality and of being desperate and feeling perhaps a sense of futility, all of those irrational sort of motives that if they had a clear head, or they could have been given a clear head for a sufficiently long period of time, they could have gotten through that period.
Yeah, and he didn't show any signs of it at all. So a lot of people who are idolizing committing suicide, everything like that, they will stop paying their bills. They'll stop just doing like their daily things, and he never did that. So nobody really had any idea that anything was going on.
Yeah, you're right. It wasn't something that people predicted. However, his wife, though, did not seem as surprised. Interestingly, she, in retrospect, had a different perspective on the last couple of days, or the day before that he committed suicide, which he did in their home on Tiburon Road. She said that the day before, he made a special effort to make it a special day. So he said they spent time together, they did things. She said it was just a great day because he had had a lot of tough days associated with his symptoms. And, you have some dementia, you have some loss of body control. It's not a happy situation. And those watching it who have experienced advanced Parkinson's disease, for example, know that those can be very challenging things. And so Robin Williams, though, his wife concluded, had determined that he was going to give her a wonderful day, and that he knew even on that day that the next day that he was going to take his life, and that he had thought this through, and not in the throes or anguish of depression, but instead he concluded that he didn't want to go downhill and to live through that, what he felt was lying ahead for him. So she didn't present it as, this sad episode that had he just had the right psychiatric care at that moment, that, everything would have been fine thereafter. She thinks that this was something that he thought about and thought quite rationally about, at least by his standards, his priorities, and concluded that's what he wanted to do. So he committed suicide by, I hate to say hanging himself. He used a belt that cut off the oxygen. So however that was done, actually, I doubt it was an actual hanging in the sense that many of us think of that word. But it was the effect of that. That of course, launched some problems with the estate, with the children. I guess we should shift gears and go to that episode. Is there anything else you would add kind of up to this point, Marley?
Not really a ton. I think, like you were saying, though, it just goes to show, like, a lot of people do think that he was super depressed and just committed suicide because of that. But truly, as I was reading through this, I was like, no, I don't think it was that. I think that did play a role, but I truly think it was just his diagnosis and that he didn't want to live that way or do that to any of his family.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But and as you point out, I'm sure there was some depression. Sure.
Yes, yeah.
But I just viewed it differently as I found out more information.
Yeah.
I didn't know that he had how advanced this disease had become, that he had, and some of the problems that he was having. So anyway, so not surprising. What do we hear often with the states? We hear that sometimes stepmoms and the step kids don't get along.
Yep.
So that is kind of what happened here. We've already said that Robin Williams had a great relationship with his children. I mean, they loved him. Cody, Zach, Zelda, they all were close to him, and they had gotten along with Susan. It wasn't as if they had openly argued, but it wouldn't be surprising that at the time that he died, that things could easily come apart. Though they held together while he was there because he was the glue that was holding things together. I should say that to his credit, he did have some estate planning done earlier. We think in the 2000s, the 2003, 4, 5 era. He had some estate planning done, and he created a trust wisely. Later, though, when he married, after he married in 2011 and 2012, he amended his trust. He created what has been termed the Susan Trust. And this was a trust that was for a specific purpose. It was a trust in which the house was placed, the Tiburon home. They owned he had another investment property, which was in Napa Valley, which was a much more expensive, much nicer property, like $25 million at the time value. And by contrast, this Tiburon home where they lived was probably valued at, they think, $5 million around this period, $4 or $5 million. A beautiful home, 6,500 square feet. They were happy there. They had this gorgeous view of the bay. Yeah, this is San Francisco area. Just a nice home, but not anything lavish, like, for example, the Napa property. So his provision in this trust was that property was to go into the Susan Trust, and Susan was to have a life estate for this property. This isn't unusual, incidentally, where somebody has remarried and they want to take care of their current wife, so they have a provision in their will or trust that the wife will be able to live in that home and maybe have some source of income. That's not unusual either. But in this case, there wasn't so much a provision for income as to assure that she had the right to stay in that home for the balance of her life and have all the expenses paid associated with the cost of that. So it wouldn't be very practical for her to be able to maintain this house on her own, probably. So Robin knew that there needed to be a provision for her to have whatever expenses associated with the home and living there to be paid out of this trust. So the trust contained the house, and there would need to be some amount of money set aside for that. I don't know how much was in the trust at that time. Again, it's one of the beauty of trusts is you don't know lots of details, and that's great when you're the family that has the trust. And you want to have as few people other than the family to know about this as possible. So that was the arrangement here. Where I think that the train comes off the track here was that there was a lot of vagueness.
Yes.
Robin Williams owned a lot of personal property, tangible personal property, we'll call it. And that includes everything from collectibles. He was a kind of a frenetic collector. He collected bicycles. He collected watches. He had sorts of toy soldiers.
Yep.
Did I read comic books?
Yeah, and fossils, comic books and fossils, yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me, incidentally, that Robin Williams would have an interest in odd things like that. But so he did. He was an avid collector, and this had value, apart from the fact that it belonged to him, but it had value. And, of course, you had all this memorabilia. We had his awards, the numerous awards he had won over the years, including the Academy Award statue. So those things had significant value. The overall estate, including the branding that we've talked so much about, the intellectual property, the royalties that would be coming in over time, was north of $100 million, general estimate. It could end up being significantly more, but it was a lot of money. At the risk of generalizing too much, he pretty much had everything going to his three kids. And that's not too surprising. I would have had more going to my current wife, probably. But, different guys handle this differently. He had a great relationship with his kids. So he did provide really for her to have this house, as well as, and this is where there's an abundance of room for different interpretations, the furnishing and contents thereof. But then he carved out a bunch of things that he said specifically were to go to the children. And if I can find this phrase here, he had collectibles, memorabilia, and knickknacks. This was actually a phrase used in the trust. So another indefinite statement was that she was to be provided such as was necessary for her to meet the reasonable house expenses. So you can see there's lots of room for interpretation here. And immediately the kids took the position that, okay, there's a sufficiently broad definition that they should have pretty much everything in the house. That's what Susan argued. Now, the children, I think, would have said, no, we didn't mean literally everything. But yes, his clothing and other things, which he did specifically give to the kids.
Yes.
So there was no vagueness about that. There were quite a few individual items that were referenced, in fairness, I should add. The trust described what he was going to pass on to his three children, and this included all of his clothing, jewelry, and personal photos taken prior to his marriage to Susan, as well as Robin's, quote, memorabilia and awards from the entertainment industry, unquote. It also gave his children, of course, all the tangible personal property located in the other real estate, which is this Napa Valley estate. It's $25 million property. Gave them the $25 million property, of course. But then when it talked about what was to be given to Susan, though it excluded those items mentioned, it still said that she was to have the furnishings and furniture of the house and whatever's necessary to maintain the property, including the expenses associated with that. So you can see that just based on the language that I've mentioned so far, like all costs related to the residence, what does that mean? So because there was this tug of war in which the two trustees that were in charge of both trusts, they were people that really were selected by Robin and probably were more aligned, I don't think it's unfair to say, with the children. So there was the estate planning lawyer who, sometimes it's difficult to be in that role as the estate planning lawyer without making somebody mad. But you had the estate planning lawyer and you had one of the accountants, a CPA that was involved with Robin's estate. So they both were acting as trustee. And the children were demanding to get access to the house. They wanted to move their stuff out immediately. And so they tended to have a very sweeping definition of what was included in their stuff. And it came to the point where Susan became concerned that she was going to have inadequate money to maintain this property. She was afraid the kids were prepared, and perhaps the trustee prepared, to simply say, here's your house, and we'll pay a few things, but no more. I think she complained that some not basic utilities were cut off, but I think one of the cable services was discontinued or something. We don't know what really goes on in those early days when you have he said, she said, sort of litigation in estates between members of the family. So we do know that Susan hired a lawyer. She filed an action. It was a request for a judge to clarify what the meaning of the language was. And this was foreseeable. So when we're looking for something here that is a learning opportunity, we know that it's not simply enough to create a trust and then back it up with a will, as there was here. There was a pour over will. Those are important things. But as we've said in recent shows, you can't stop there. It's good that that was done, and often even that isn't done. But the language was so vague that it really almost made it inevitable that you were going to have an argument about how much money do the children need to place, or do the trustees rather need to place into Susan's trust to assure that all these reasonable expenses are covered. Like Susan made the argument that because this house was older, that there was some $30,000 in renovations that were needed. And she argued that that's a reasonable cost related to living in the residence was, periodic renovations. Was it or wasn't it? And this was something that, unfortunately, a judge had to decide. The kids claimed virtually all the personal property, and Susan said, "But what about our wedding gifts?" Mm-hmm. And clearly, a wedding gift is to the two parties, and to the extent that it became a he said, she said, or a shoving match on issues like that, she at least was a co-owner of those assets. And one could argue that she became full owner when the other owner passed away. You'd hope you wouldn't spend a lot of money on wedding gifts, but maybe there's a significant amount of value in these wedding gifts. But I think most of this was of personal importance to everyone involved mm-hmm. here. I really don't think this was that much about money mm-hmm. from as I've read about this. You agree with that, Marlea?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I was reading somewhere, and like you said, it's definitely he said, she said situation. But I was reading somewhere that Susan stated that the kids were threatening to come in, take everything out of the house, go through it, and then they would say, like, what's hers and what's theirs from all of Robin's stuff. And I definitely think it was just, like you said, it wasn't because of the money. It was because of a personal connection to it and them wanting to feel like they were still close to their father because of how quickly he was taken.
Yeah. And that was, I think that was her fear. And mm-hmm. in the kids' defense, or let me put it I can see it better from the trustee's standpoint. Here's one of the jobs of a trustee. And this is understandable. A trustee's duty is, as soon as they acquire their responsibilities, like when they step into their succession role, where it was Robin Williams as the trustee while he was alive of his own trust. That's typical. So when he passes, immediately you have these successor trustees that I just mentioned who step into this role. Well, one of their most solemn obligations, and the lawyer especially was acutely aware of this, is to marshal all the assets, to identify what all the assets are for which the trustee is responsible. So often that means, at a minimum, doing an inventory of everything. But sometimes it may mean taking them into your possession to assure that they're safe, and then deciding how to allocate those outside the trust in terms of ownership, to distribute them. So the trustee, theoretically would gather all the assets, would then say, okay, I'm reading the terms of the trust. Okay, these assets go to you children, take them. They're no longer in the trust. They're yours. And then hand to the surviving spouse, Susan, whatever things were intended to be hers. But it doesn't necessarily mean taking physical possession into one place, but it at a minimum would mean an inventory. So Susan felt that they're coming into the home, she was losing control, and that there'd be things removed, and she was powerless to stop it. Mm-hmm. So she brought a legal action. I understand why she did that. She really wanted to have some rules.
Yes.
And she wanted a judge to decide, what does this mean? And it turns out that she kept, most of it she did give up, incidentally. Mm-hmm. The court said, and she agreed, there was a settlement before a judge ruling. So This was technically a settlement.
Yeah.
But I think that they all knew at that point what the judge was going to rule. Mm-hmm. Often that you find out in a pretrial conference or settlement conference. So it helps the parties come together after that and kind of settle. So it was, and I think it was as amicable as settlements get.
Yes.
You don't hear a lot about these parties arguing in the future.
No.
So this is not, the James Brown scenario we went through, or what was it, 15 years of litigation?
Yes, yeah. I mean, this was a little while of litigation, but nothing completely insane. And that does bring me to two questions that I do have for you. So is it typical that trusts are written in this vague of language? And then I guess this is kind of a two-part question. And if that's typical, then would you recommend going through your personal belongings, like kind of how you would for, your homeowner's insurance. You go through your bigger things, make out a list, and kind of just like who you want it to go through, so there's not as much confusion in all of this.
Yeah, yeah, and in answer to your question, often there is more specificity. Yes, not perfect description, but typically more so than this. Where there was going to be potential friction, which this was foreseeable, the amount of money that was going to be provided should have been defined more clearly, because it could end up swinging from a low of maybe $10,000 a month to $100,000 renovation at some point, or a couple of renovations adding up to $100,000 in addition to the 10, or even just without renovations. There could have been a difference between, say, as little as $5,000 or as much as 20 or 25, depending on what is the level of upkeep that is going to be maintained. So it was. The thing with the life estate is, above all things, the children have an interest in maintaining the property because they ultimately will have what's called the residuary interest. So the property will revert to them when she passes, and so they have an interest in maintaining the value of that property.
That makes
sense.
sense.
So many things they can agree on, but either way, it's coming out of the pocket of the trust, which means it's coming out of the fund that would otherwise be going to the children.
Yeah.
So what was nice about this was the judge would have, and I'm sure the parties did in a settlement, decide on a specific amount of money that was going to be placed inside Susan's trust and say, this is the amount of money that will be the fund that will be used to maintain this over time. And it was probably, there's a little bit of guesswork in that, but as long as Susan said, okay, I'll go with that, then you could lock down a sum and not have it with floating uncertainty. And you may say, well, why would Susan agree to a sum when she might live longer than she thinks? Because the sum is probably a pretty generous one, because it allows the children to have closure. They don't have to wonder for the next 30 years, for example, or 40, whether they're going to have $100,000 or $500,000 in this house total in living expenses, or 2 or 3 times that, because they wouldn't know. And so often, when you're settling a lawsuit and you can have certainty, often you'll pay more for that. So I suspect that they ended up settling on an amount of money that Susan thought, okay, I'll take my chances with that amount of money.
Yeah.
And that probably would explain what happened thereafter. When we were preparing for this, viewers, we thought that Susan would still be living in this house, that she had talked so much about what it meant to her, and I don't doubt that it did. But then we came across an ad for the sale of the house in 2020, where apparently it actually did sell, and that was where I came up to 5.2 or 5.3 million was the sales price at that time. So I think what happened was there was a sum of money that was already set aside. And the deal was, look, if you sell the property, that's fine. You just take this cash that's yours, and the kids are happy because they get otherwise get the proceeds from the sale of the house.
Yeah.
So I think that's how it came about. Otherwise, Susan would have been locked down in this house, because she certainly wouldn't move if she wouldn't get compensated at all.
No.
And she just now is walking away from a free housing to pay for it herself. So that with this arrangement, Susan could feel free that, no, I think I want to move. And there would be a sum of money available to her that the children would happily have her receive, because they're better off.
Yes.
And so when it was sold, of course, the proceeds, except for this amount of money for Susan, would go to the children.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. I think that just, this is all speculation, but I think her reasoning probably of moving out of that house was that. And then obviously, he committed suicide in that house. I know before she married him, she was a graphic designer. So I don't think I think she probably made decent money, but I don't think that she was making like a lot of money without him around, or living that same exact lifestyle that she wanted to in that same area, in that same household without him around, just because she only got the house and she only got funds for the house. She didn't really get anything else. So I'm sure in her mind, she was like, okay, I can just, cut my ties, cut my losses, go live on my own. I can kind of live a similar lifestyle with the proceeds from this house and what the trustees might give me, and then live in, a different area and maybe a smaller house or whatever.
And that's what made that so attractive.
Yes.
Was that she had the flexibility to where I bet at some point she's thinking, I'm spending the equivalent of $20,000 a month here. I could go live somewhere. I could take the cash that I would otherwise be spent on this house. I can go somewhere and rent an apartment for $5,000 a month, maybe, and have this other money to live on. So I think you're right. I think that eventually she concluded that it was too high a standard of living than she required, and she could use the money better in a different way. And I think Robin Williams would have been fine with that.
Yeah, I agree. And she did have 2 sons, so I'm sure she did have to go back to work. I'm sure she had to do all of those things. So like we just said, it's probably just a better situation for her to go and rent something smaller and less pricey, and then have all of that money to put in their college savings or to put in her retirement so that she didn't have to work any longer.
Yeah. You know what? I think we got through this topic more efficiently than we normally do, Marlea.
I know. Look at us go.
I don't know, is that a commentary on you and me being more laconic, or is that Robin Williams' life?
No, I think it's a you and I thing. I think we like the people that we talk about. And we love Robin Williams too, but
we do. And so this was interesting, and to his credit, he made some great decisions with his life. The suicide, it's hard to ever think of that as a rational decision, and most of us don't. But I recognize that sometimes people, are very thoughtful about it, and they make that decision. And so I've learned a lot more about Robin Williams than I knew before. And I do respect him in ways that I didn't before I knew so much about him. So I hope everyone enjoyed this. I hope you profited from it as well. This has been another episode of Life's Third Act. Till next time, take care.
You've been listening to Life's Third Act, a podcast for thriving in retirement. Sponsored by TuckerAllen, your estate and elder law advisors. Each week, we discuss topics and answer questions to help you better plan for your future. For more information, visit TuckerAllen.com. Subscribe and listen again next week for another edition of Life's Third Act. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.